Namaste and welcome to Daily News Simplified, the what, why, and how of newspaper reading.
Now we would be analyzing the Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper of 23rd of March 2019, and the news that would be covered today is given on the screen, and the timestamp for the same is given in the description and the comment section given below. And so now with this, let us start with the first article. Now we have taken the lead editorial from the editorial page on page 6. Now the main focus of this editorial is the US withdrawal from Afghanistan. Now in particular, what this article mainly highlights are the various concerns for India that have emerged due to the current participation of the Taliban in negotiations with the United States and with other countries. And apart from this, the editorial also highlights possible future steps that India can take with regards to the Taliban when the United States withdraws from Afghanistan. Now, you should see this article as part of the continuous coverage provided in Daily News Simplified on the US withdrawal from Afghanistan. So, now let us first understand the various concerns which the author has highlighted due to the current participation of the Taliban in negotiations with the United States and other countries. Now, the first concern which has been highlighted by the author is that the Afghan government is being excluded in the negotiations between the Taliban and the United States. Now, the Taliban is already a major player in the politics of Afghanistan, as they already control more than 50% of the territory of Afghanistan. And apart from this, the Taliban has also engaged in direct talks with China, Russia, the Central Asian countries, among others. However, the Taliban has refused to talk to the Afghanistan government, whereby they consider the Afghanistan government as the illegitimate ruler of Afghanistan. And what was the initial position of the United States was that it would not talk to the Taliban without the presence of the Afghanistan government. However, what has happened is that according to the current policy of Donald Trump, they are willing to talk to the Taliban without the presence of the Afghanistan government. And this has become a major problem for India because India does not talk to the Taliban. And India is only willing to engage with the Afghanistan government. And therefore, if the United States and other countries continue to engage in direct talks with the Taliban by excluding the Afghanistan government, it would decrease the legitimacy and the hold of the Afghan government. And apart from this, you should also understand that Taliban is currently being supported in negotiations by Pakistan, while the Afghanistan government has been mainly supportive of India's role. And therefore, any form of exclusion of the Afghan government with regards to the future of Afghanistan would be detrimental or have a negative impact on India's position within Afghanistan. Now, the second concern which has been highlighted by the author is that the United States is engaging in negotiations with the Taliban without the Taliban having agreed to a ceasefire within Afghanistan. Now, the United States had earlier said that it is not going to talk to the Taliban without having the Taliban agree to a ceasefire within Afghanistan. But what is currently being seen is that the Taliban continues to engage in terrorist activities within Afghanistan. And thereby, what is currently happening is that Taliban is going to have a greater role in the future of Afghanistan, and its legitimacy has also increased due to its direct talks with the United States. But nonetheless, the Taliban continues to engage in terrorist activities. And since it continues to engage in terrorist activities, it decreases the legitimacy of the current Afghan government, which is supposed to be fighting the terrorism that is being engaged by Taliban. And similarly, it also decreases the legitimacy of the United States, whereby it was the United States that launched the US war on terror. But now it is willing to talk and engage in negotiations with a terrorist entity. And therefore, this has become a cause of concern for India, whereby the United States is engaging with a terrorist entity and thereby increasing its legitimacy within Afghanistan, and similarly decreasing the legitimacy of the current Afghan government, which is fighting terrorism. Now, the third concern for India is that the talks between the United States and the Taliban, and between the Taliban and other countries, continue to form without acknowledging any form of future role for India within Afghanistan. Now, what is happening is that the United States is engaging with talks with the Taliban. Similarly, Russia, under the Moscow format, is also engaging in talks with the Taliban. Similarly, China and the Central Asian countries are also engaging in talks with the Taliban. But what is currently missing is that the United States has not said, Russia has also not said, while China and other countries which are engaging in talks with the Taliban have also not said as to what would be the future role of India within Afghanistan. However, the main concern for India is that the United States, which is in direct talks with the Taliban, has not clearly stated as to what would be the future role for India once it withdraws its troops from Afghanistan. And how should India then engage with the Taliban, the Afghan government, and similarly, and how India should engage with the future role of Pakistan within Afghanistan. And therefore, the main concern for India is that it is being overlooked while deciding the future of Afghanistan. Now, the fourth main concern for India is that Pakistan has emerged as the main negotiating mediator between the United States and the Taliban. Now, it was seen that during the 1990s and even afterwards, that Pakistan was the main supporter of the Taliban government within Afghanistan. And what is currently being seen is that Pakistan continues to enjoy great influence over the Taliban within Afghanistan. And thereby, the United States has taken the help of Pakistan to engage in talks with the Taliban. And this has increased the legitimacy and the requirement of Pakistan for the United States. And this was also seen in the recent Pulwama attack, whereby Pakistan was able to leverage its position with regards to its negotiations with the Taliban and the future of Afghanistan to ensure that the United States does not take any form of action against Pakistan. And this has become a major cause of concern for India, whereby what is currently being seen is that Pakistan would have greater influence over the future of Afghanistan, while India, which we have already understood, is currently having lesser influence with regards to the negotiations for the future of Afghanistan. And now, the fifth and the last concern, which has been highlighted by the author with regards to concerns for India, is that if India does decide to engage in talks with the Taliban, it would first betray the moral principle that India does not talk to terrorists, and secondly, any direct talks that India may engage in with the Taliban would also mean bypassing the Afghanistan government. Now, one of the solutions through which India can increase its significance with regards to the future of Afghanistan is by engaging in direct talks with the Taliban. However, any direct talks that India engages with the Taliban raises two major concerns. First, that it betrays the moral principle of India that it does not talk to terrorists. And secondly, one of the aspects that India has continuously focused upon is the Afghan government. However, if India would continue to talk directly with the Taliban, it means bypassing the Afghanistan government. And this would mean that India would then alienate the main supporting actor for India, which is the Afghanistan government. Now, these are the five main concerns which has been highlighted by the author with regards to concerns for India due to the direct talks between the Taliban and the United States. Now, let us understand the various future steps that the author has highlighted that India could take so as to increase its significance or its hold with regards to the negotiations for the future of Afghanistan. Now, the first main step that India can take, which has been highlighted by the author, is that India could work with the grand coalition of Afghan leaders. Whereby, according to the author, what India can do is support a grand lawyer Jigra for negotiations with regards to the future of Afghanistan. Now, in simple terms, a Loya Jigra is a grand assembly of elders and tribal chiefs within Afghanistan. Now, this form of Loya Jigra is mostly favored by the Pashtun people who currently live within Pakistan and Afghanistan and has been reportedly organized since the Kushan Empire under Kanishka in ancient history to the Durrani dynasties within the modern history of Afghanistan. Now, this concept of Loya Jigra is similar to the concept of a Sabha which is used in the Indian subcontinent. And according to the author, what India can do is form a Grand Jigra which would be similar to the Moscow format which Russia had formed. And in this, India can invite all the Afghan leaders who can then negotiate for the future of Afghanistan. And thereby, like similar to the United States, Russia, and other major powers, India then can also host its own negotiating table with regards to the future of Afghanistan. The second step, which has been highlighted by the author, is that India should leverage its soft power within Afghanistan. Now, as you already understand, India has tremendous soft power within Afghanistan, whereby what is being seen is that many students from Afghanistan are currently studying within India. Apart from this, India has engaged in a lot of development and construction so as to improve the life of the Afghan people. And apart from this, the Indian Election Commission and various agencies of India also work for the formation of an effective democratic institutions within Afghanistan, whereby India also helps with regards to conducting of elections within Afghanistan. And what the author is trying to say is that India must leverage its soft power with regards to the future of Afghanistan. And this leveraging of soft power has not only to be done with the people of Afghanistan or the government of Afghanistan, but should also be done with all of those countries which are currently in negotiations for the future of Afghanistan, whereby the United States, Russia, and other countries cannot ignore the significance of India within the future of Afghanistan, especially with regards to the potential that India provides for the future economic growth of Afghanistan. Now, these are the two main steps which has been highlighted by the author that India can take so as to remain significant with regards to the negotiations for the future of Afghanistan. Now, you should consider that this news with regards to the US withdrawal from Afghanistan is currently news in transition, whereby it continues to be covered within the Daily News Simplified. So now hopefully you have understood as to what the author is trying to say within this editorial. And so now with this, let us move on to the next article. Now, I've taken this editorial from the editorial page on page 6. Now, this article highlights various points with regards to Bhagat Singh and on how the intellectual capability of Bhagat Singh should become a beacon or provide a roadmap through which a new India can be built. Now, we'll understand the various points which has been highlighted by the author with regards to Bhagat Singh from the perspective of your upcoming prelims examination of 2019. Now, Bhagat Singh was born in Lialpur, Punjab, which is now in Pakistan, in 1907, and he died in Lahore, Pakistan, in 1931. Bhagat Singh began the Naujawan Bharat Sabha and later became involved with the Hindustan Socialist Republican Association or Army. Now, with regards to this organization, sometimes the word association is used, and in certain other cases, the word army has been used. Bhagat Singh also organized the Lahore Students' Union with Sukhdev for open legal work among students. The fourth point is the Bhagat Singh with others had plotted to kill the police chief S.P. Scott, who was responsible for the death of Lala Lajpat Rai during the anti-Simon agitation. But however, in a case of mistaken identity, a junior officer named J.P. Saunders was killed. The fifth point is that Bhagat Singh with B.K. Dutt bombed the Central Legislative Assembly in Delhi in 1929 to protest the implementation of the Defence of India Act. Now, the major works of Bhagat Singh includes Why I Am an Atheist, Punjab, The Problem of Language and Script, Communal Problem and Its Solution, Universal Brotherhood, Indian Perspective, among other. Bhagat Singh also wrote for Kirti, Veer Arjun, Akali, and Pratap, which were daily newspapers and magazines. However, he wrote for them under different names. And the eighth and the last point is that Bhagat Singh, along with Rajguru and Sukhdev, were hanged for the death of J.P. Saunders in 1931. Now, hopefully, up till here, you've understood the major highlights and facts with regards to Bhagat Singh, and they become relevant with regards to your upcoming prelims examination, wherein previously questions have been asked on Indian freedom fighters such as Lala Lajpat Rai, Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, C. Rajagopalachari, Surya Sen, among others. And within that context, this section becomes important. And so now with this, we move on to the next article. Now we have taken this article from page 5. Now what this article talks about is that the Ministry of Environment has proposed a legislation known as the Indian Forest Act of 2019, which seeks to amend the Indian Forest Act of 1927. Whereby the main highlights of this legislation is that it seeks to give the Indian forest officers the power of a civil court so that they can prevent offences. Apart from this, it also proposes a forest development cess, where a cess would be provided on the mined products within a forest. Apart from this, this legislation also introduces a number of definitions which were not available in the earlier Indian Forest Act of 1927. Whereby the new act defines as to what is a village forest, it also defines as to what would be considered as a forest community. Apart from this, the new act also defines as to what would be a production forest, whereby it seeks to define forests in which timber and other forms of products which are produced within a forest. However, you have to understand that this news is currently in transition, whereby the Ministry of Environment has sent this proposed legislation known as the Indian Forest Act of 2019 to various states and other stakeholders for comments. And apart from this, you should also understand that the prelims or the mains examination have never asked a question on various bills, whereby questions have only been asked on various acts. And since the Indian Forest Act of 2019 is currently a bill and has been open for comments to various states and other stakeholders, we should consider it as a news in transition. And let us wait and see as to what would be the final form of this bill, and it is better to understand about it when this bill becomes an act. And so now with this, let us move on to the next article. Now we have taken this article from page 12. Now, as you already may know, that the United States has imposed sanctions on Venezuela. And what this article talks about is that there have been allegations that the Reliance company has supplied naphtha to Venezuela, whereby the Reliance company has said that it has complied with the US sanctions on Venezuela and has not supplied any form of naphtha to Venezuela. Now, what we'll try to understand from this article is the current crisis with regards to US sanctions on Venezuela. And after that, we'll try to understand as to what has been the impact on India due to the US sanctions. And when we understand the impact on India due to the US sanctions on Venezuela, we'll also try to understand on how it has impacted Indian companies. Now, the United States has imposed sanctions on the Venezuelan oil industry, in particular the main state company of Venezuela, which is PDVSA. Now, the largest market for the Venezuelan oil industry was the United States. However, what has happened now is that the United States has completely terminated any form of imports from the Venezuelan oil industry. And the main reason as to why the United States has imposed sanctions on the Venezuelan oil industry is to deprive the Nicolas Maduro government of Venezuela of its main source of income, which is oil revenues. Now, the government of Nicolas Maduro is a left leaning government within Latin America, whereby Nicolas Maduro took over the government of Venezuela after the death of its earlier leader, Hugo Chavez. Now, one of the main reasons as to why the United States and several European countries want to deprive the main source of income for the Nicolas Maduro government is because of the huge refugee crisis that have occurred within Venezuela. Now, because of these sanctions which have been imposed by the United States and several European countries, the biggest market for the Venezuelan oil industry, which was the United States, has now been closed off. Now, the main result that these sanctions have produced is that China and India have now become one of the major markets for the Venezuelan oil industry. Now, India and China were already major markets for the Venezuelan oil industry. However, after the United States and the European countries imposed sanctions on Venezuela, China and India have emerged not only as the major market, but as one of the only markets for the Venezuelan oil industry. And one of the main reasons for this is because refineries within India and China are the only ones outside the United States that are able to refine the heavy and the sour crude oil which is produced by the Venezuelan oil industry. And this is the main reason as to why the importance of India and China have drastically increased with regards to the successful imposition of sanctions by the United States on the Venezuelan oil industry, whereby it is only the refineries within India and China after the United States that are capable of refining the heavy and the sour crude oil that is produced by the Venezuelan oil industry. And apart from that, India and China are also major markets after the United States for the Venezuelan oil industry. And it is within that context that we're going to understand the impact on India due to the sanctions imposed by the United States on Venezuela. Now, in 2018, India became the second largest importer of Venezuelan oil. And therefore, the Venezuelan oil industry became an important partner for providing India's energy security. However, after the United States imposed sanctions on the Venezuelan oil industry, it became difficult for private players within India, such as the Reliance Industries Limited, Niara Energy, and other private players of India that were engaging in oil trade with Venezuelan oil industry. And what these private Indian companies did was terminate their trade with the Venezuelan oil industry. Now, the third impact on India was that because of the humanitarian crisis within Venezuela and due to the sanctions that have been imposed on the Venezuelan oil industry, it became unclear whether Venezuela would be able to fulfill its contractual obligation of oil delivery to India, whereby it was already seen in 2018 that the Venezuelan shipments to India fell by 11%. Now, apart from the fact that because of the Venezuelan crisis, the Venezuelan oil industry has been unable to fulfill India's demand for oil. Another problem has arose that because of the US sanctions, payment for the Venezuelan oil has become a challenge for India. Now, within that context, Venezuela has shown interest to conduct oil trade with India through a barter system. Now, within that context, what Venezuela has said that India imports roughly around $5 billion worth of oil products from Venezuela. However, it has become a problem for India to pay this amount of money to Venezuela because of the US sanctions. And therefore, what Venezuela has said that India need not require to pay $5 billion in cash to Venezuelan government, and what India can do is supply rice, wheat, and other forms of commodities. And the amount of money for these commodities would then be balanced off from the $5 billion that India would have to pay for oil. And this is a form of barter system which Venezuela has recommended and India may follow. And this has one more advantage for India, whereby India is able to export roughly only around $79 million worth of good to Venezuela. And therefore, there is a huge trade deficit between Venezuela and India. And if India does agree to this barter system with the Venezuelan government, whereby India is able to export rice, wheats, and other commodities, it would increase the value of exports from India to Venezuela. And apart from this, because India would not be paying in cash to the Venezuelan government, it would also ensure that most of the dollars that India requires also is kept at home. However, it is yet to be seen as to what would be the response of the Indian government to this recommendation by the Venezuelan government for the barter system. Now, this is a similar system that Venezuela has also used with China, whereby what China has done is give a large amount of loans to the Venezuelan government. And therefore, for the payment of the principal and the interest amount from the Venezuelan government back to China, what they have decided upon is a form of barter system, whereby for the principal and the interest amount on the loans that the Venezuelan government has taken for China, Venezuela is paying the Chinese government in form of oil. However, it is yet to be seen as to whether India agrees to the barter system with the Venezuelan government or not. So now hopefully you've gotten a basic understanding with regards to the US sanctions on the Venezuelan oil industry and its impact on India. Now apart from this, you also need to understand that this is an evolving news and continues to be in transition. However, one aspect that you need to remember from this article with regards to your upcoming prelims examination is that PDSFA is an important company of Venezuela and continues to be in the news. And most of the US and the European sanctions have been imposed on the state oil company of the Venezuelan government. And therefore, knowing the fact that PDSFA is a state oil company of the Venezuelan government becomes of international importance for your prelims examination. And so now with this, let us move on to the next article. Now we have taken this article from page 12. Now what this article talks about is an economic concept called missing muddle. And we're going to understand about this concept of missing muddle from your perspective of your upcoming prelims examination of 2019. Now each year in your prelims examination, questions are continuously asked with regards to economic concepts, such as in the 2018 prelims examination, a question was asked as to what is the merchant discount rate. Similarly, in the 2017 examination, a question was asked as to what is the domestic content requirement. Similarly, in the prelims examination of 2016, a question was asked as to what is import cover. And in similar contexts, questions each year are asked in your prelims examination with regards to economic concepts. And it is within that context that missing muddle becomes an important economic concept to understand with regards to your upcoming prelims examination of 2019. Now, a recent report of the State Bank of India has analyzed various state budgets. And in this report, while analyzing the various state budgets, it has highlighted one major concern, that is of missing muddle. Now, as you already may be aware of, that the budget is presented on the 1st of February every year, and it is presented before the completion of the financial year. Now, when we mean the financial year, it means from the 1st of April to 31st of March. Now, let's say for an example that a budget that was presented on 1st of February 2019 would contain the revised estimates for the current financial year, meaning from 1st of April 2018 to 31st of March 2019. Apart from this, it would also contain estimates for the next financial year, that is from 1st of April 2019 till 31st of March 2020. And lastly, it would also contain the actuals of the previous financial year, that is from 1st of April 2017 till 31st of March 2018. And so therefore a budget presents the revised estimates for the current financial year, estimates for the next financial year, and apart from this, it also presents the actuals for the previous financial year. However, what the report from the State Bank of India has highlighted that there has been a mismatch in the budgeted fiscal deficit and the revised fiscal deficit for a financial year. However, what is being seen is that the actual fiscal deficit is closer to the budgeted fiscal deficit. So let's say in a simple example that a state has decided to have its budgeted fiscal deficit to be at 3%. However, what is being seen is that when the state governments present their budget, their revised fiscal deficit for the financial year has actually increased. So a state government may show a 5% revised fiscal deficit. However, what is being seen is that when the actual fiscal deficit is presented next year, it is seen to be closer to 3%. And this mismatch has been highlighted as missing muddle in the SBI report. Now the question becomes as to what is the reason for this missing muddle. Now what is being seen is that there is a sudden expenditure by the state governments during the middle of the year. And this sudden expenditure by a state government can be in the form of a loan waiver, incentive scheme, or any other form of announcement. And because of this sudden expenditure, it results in a dramatic revision of the budgeted numbers. And therefore, this becomes one of the initial reasons for the missing model, whereby the state government has decided to keep a budgeted fiscal deficit at around 3%. But because in the middle of the year they have announced loan waivers, incentive schemes, or other forms, their expenditure has increased, and therefore their revised fiscal deficit comes to be around 5%. However, what subsequently happens is that the states have to reduce this fiscal deficit and therefore they cut down on their capital expenditure. Apart from this, they also increase their tax revenue so as to reduce the fiscal deficit. Now, what this means is that because the state government is spending more money in the form of loan waiver, incentive scheme, or any other announcement, they would then reduce the amount of expenditure that they may have decided earlier upon to spend on education, health, or any other sector. And therefore, they're compensating for the sudden expenditure in the form of loan waiver or any other announcement by cutting down on the decided expenditure in the budget within the health, education, or any other sector. And therefore, what this does is reduce the expenditure of the state government. And apart from this, what the state governments also try to do is increase their tax revenue. And if the tax revenue is increased, then the revenue of the government is increased, and therefore also the fiscal deficit comes down. And this becomes one of the main reasons as to when the actual fiscal deficit is presented, it is closer to the budgeted fiscal deficit, whereby through this cut in capital expenditure and the increase in tax revenue, they make sure that this increase in fiscal deficit from 5% is then reduced to 3%. And this became the main reason as to why there is a missing model within this budget of state governments. Now, within that regard, three main concerns have been raised with regards to this missing model. Now, the first main concern is that it provides an inadequate or the wrong signal to the markets with regards to the overall fiscal consolidation of the state. Whereby, when the state has shown that its revised fiscal deficit number is around 5%, then it decreases the sentiments within the market with regards to investing within that state. However, what is seen in the next financial year is that the actual fiscal deficit is closer to the budgeted fiscal deficit, and it necessarily creates a condition within the market in which there is a lower investment sentiment within that state. The second concern which has been raised is that missing model cuts down on productive capital expenditure. Now, one of the main reasons for the missing model is because of the sudden expenditure which have been announced by the state government. And make the actual fiscal deficit closer to the budgeted fiscal deficit, the state governments then cut down on the budgeted expenditure for various sectors such as health and education. And therefore, what the concern is that the state governments are cutting down on productive capital expenditure. Now, the third and the final main concern which has been highlighted is that if there is ever a fall in the tax revenue, it may become difficult for the state to match their actual with their budgeted numbers. Now, as we have already understood that the state government cuts down or reduces its fiscal deficit by increasing its tax revenue. This is in addition to their cutting down of capital expenditure. However, what the article is trying to highlight is that if there is no increase in the tax revenue, then it would become difficult for the state government to reduce their fiscal deficit. And what it generally would lead to is for the state government to further cut down on its capital expenditure. Now, these are the main concepts that you needed to understand with regards to missing model. And so now with this, let us move on to the next section. Now there are two questions for your practice, whereby question 1 reads, consider the following statements with regards to Bhagat Singh. The first statement reads, he published his first article on the subject Universal Brotherhood in Matwala, which is a Hindi magazine. The second statement reads, Bhagat Singh bombed the Central Legislative Assembly during the Quit India movement. Which of the statements given above is correct? Now question 2 reads, PDVSA was recently seen in the news. It is associated with which of the following country? Wherein the first option is Venezuela, second option is Afghanistan, third option is Italy, and the fourth option is China. And what you need to do is pause this video, solve both of these questions, and wait for 5 seconds for the correct answer. Now the correct answer to question number 1 is A, one only, whereby Bhagat Singh bombed the Central Legislative Assembly within Delhi during 1929, and he bombed the Central Legislative Assembly in 1929 to protest against the Defence of India Act. And with regards to question number 2, PDVSA was recently seen in the news in association with the country Venezuela. Now, PDVSA is the main state oil company of Venezuela on whose sanctions have been imposed by the United States and other European countries. Now, there are two more questions for your practice, whereby question 3 reads, consider the following statements with regards to Loya Jirga. Now, statement 1 reads, it is a medieval concept of a grand assembly comprising of elders and tribal chiefs. The second statement reads, it is similar to concept of Sabha used in the Indian subcontinent. Which of the statements given above is correct? Now question 4 reads, which of the following correctly describes the attributes of naphtha? Now statement 1 reads, naphtha is a highly flammable liquid hydrogen mixture. The second statement reads, it is used chiefly as diluent and as raw material for conversion to gasoline. And as you already understand, what you need to do is pause this video, solve both of these questions, and wait for 5 seconds for the correct answer. Now, with regards to question number 1, the correct answer is B, 2 only, whereby Loya Jirga is an ancient concept, not a medieval concept, whereby it was already seen during the Kushan Empire under the rule of Kanishka, whereby the correct answer to question number 4 is C, both 1 and 2. Now, naphtha is the material which has been alleged that the Reliance company has provided to Venezuela, and it was within that context that the naphtha material was in the news. And naphtha is a highly flammable liquid hydrogen mixture which is chiefly used as diluents and as a raw material for conversion to gasoline. Now I have taken this editorial from the editorial page on page 6. Now what this article talks about is that there should be greater surveillance across India for the West Nile virus. Now what has happened is that there has been a death of a child in Kerala's Malappuram district due to the West Nile virus. Now this West Nile virus has already been covered in the Daily News Simplified video of 14th of March, and it has been covered in depth by Basava sir. And what you can do is refer to the Daily News Simplified video of 14th of March to further understand about the West Nile fever. And the link to the DNS video of 14th of March is also provided in the description section given below. Apart from this, there's also a news on page 7 which has said that Italy is going to become the first G7 country to join the Belt Road Initiative of China. Now, Italy joining the Belt Road Initiative has already been covered in the Daily News Simplified video of 9th of March by Mangal sir, whereby the DNS video explains as to what is meant by BRI membership or the membership of the Belt Road Initiative. And similarly, the Daily News Simplified of 9th of March also explains as to what would be the benefits for Italy and what would be the benefits for China, with Italy becoming the first G7 country to join the Belt Road Initiative. And you can refer to the Daily News Simplified video of 9th of March to further understand about this. And the link to this Daily News Simplified video is also provided in the description section.
And now with this, we come to an end in the analysis of today's newspaper. Now we move on to the question for today.